Hello. I'm happy to present this joint work which was developed for my master's thesis at the University of Aberdeen, supervised by Arabella and Mario. When taking part in a dialogue, speakers constantly make choices about how to express their communicative goals. These choices are shaped by both speaker and listener costs. Speakers need to manage their own production costs, the effort involved in planning and producing an utterance. At the same time, they may also take into account the listener's comprehension costs, how easy or difficult it would be for the listener to understand and interpret what is being said. Probabilistic pragmatic and information theoretic models of communication provide a general framework for reasoning about utterance choice. They portray speakers as choosing among alternative ways of expressing an intended meaning under resource constraints, trading off their own production cost with the listener's comprehension cost. This framing leaves two modeling questions open. First, how should production and comprehension costs be defined, distinguished, and weighted against one another? And second, what is the set of alternatives over which speakers are assumed to minimize cost? Information theoretic notions of cost, such as surprisal, uniformity of information density, are often used to explain speakers' production choices, but it is often unclear whether they represent comprehension cost, production cost, or some combination of the two. For example, choosing a simpler utterance, one with lower surprisal, could be interpreted as a cost minimization strategy from the purpose of both interlocutors. It may reduce the speaker's effort in producing the utterance, while also making the utterance easier for the listener to process. In this paper, we propose a principled way to formalize and compare speaker and listener costs by making the space of alternatives explicit. Given the start of an utterance, both speakers will form expectations over possible alternative continuations. These expectations will be shaped by knowledge of, or uncertainty over, the speaker goal. The alternatives the speaker considers are shaped by their communicative goal. They may vary in syntactic realization, lexical semantic choice, register, etc., but all preserve the same underlying communicative intent. On the other hand, the alternatives the listener considers are shaped by contextual plausibility, but reflect uncertainty over which the goals the speaker intends to communicate. In some cases, the listener will predict a continuation that matches the speaker's goal if their shared dialogue context makes this highly predictable. For our experimental setup, we extract utterances from the switchboard corpus, a corpus of real human dialogues with high-quality transcriptions. We then split each utterance of the matrix verb. This gives us two parts, the preceding context and the human continuation. Then, conditioned on the start of the sentence and some preceding dialogue context, we use GPT-4 to generate alternate continuations in two ways. To generate goal-directed alternatives, we paraphrase the original continuation. This preserves the speaker's intended meaning, but varies how that meaning is expressed. To generate goal-agnostic alternatives, we generate continuations conditioned only on the preceding context. These alternatives are plausible in the dialogue, but they are not constrained to express the same communicative goal as the original human continuation. We then use an LLM judge to group paraphrases together, forming the goal-directed set. The goal-agnostic set simply includes all generated continuations. With these two types of alternative sets, we can now ask, does the human continuation minimize cost with respect to the goal-directed set, which would reflect a speaker-oriented notion of cost minimization? Or is cost minimized against the goal-agnostic set, which would reflect a listener-oriented cost management? As cost measures, we use surprisal, uniformity, both in local and global measures, and sentence length. These are all common measures used to approximate speaker and listener processing costs in the literature. We use GPT-2 to calculate surprisal since it is known to be a good estimate of human processing difficulty. For each cost measure, we use a positive cost to indicate higher effort. That is, higher surprisal, lower uniformity, and greater length are associated with higher costs. Before running the main analyses, we first check that the generated alternatives are not systematically more or less costly than the human continuations. If they were, any comparison would be confounded. To avoid this, we use stratified sampling to select generated alternatives whose overall cost distributions match the human ones across all contexts. To test our strongest hypothesis, that human continuations hard minimize cost significantly more than by chance, we rank the cost of the human continuation against the goal-directed and goal-agnostic alternative sets. Dotted lines indicate chance level frequency for receiving a rank of 1. Overall, we find that human continuations minimize cost more often than we would expect by chance. This pattern is especially clear for Surprisal in the goal-directed set. Here, 53.4% of human continuations have the lowest Surprisal among their alternatives, which is 3.24 times higher than the chance baseline. This supports a speaker-oriented interpretation of Surprisal-based cost minimization. Length shows the largest increase over chance in the goal-agnostic setting, 3.69 times higher than the baseline, and larger than any other cost measure. This suggests that length-based minimization may reflect a listener-oriented pressure. Finally, we relax the assumption that speakers deterministically choose the lowest cost continuation, and instead model cost minimization as probabilistic. To test this, we use a pairwise logistic model. We recast each observation as a binary comparison between the human continuation and a contextual alternative. The model asks whether the difference in cost predicts which continuation was actually chosen. To test whether cost sensitivity differs between the goal-directed and the goal-agnostic condition, we include an interaction between cost differences and the alternate set type. The Surprisal model achieves the highest log likelihood overall. Again, we find the Surprisal minimization is strongest in the goal-directed setting, with a much weaker effect in the goal-agnostic setting. Interestingly, for uniformity in the goal-agnostic setting, we find the opposite pattern. Less uniform and therefore more costly continuations are more likely to be chosen. In summary, by distinguishing between goal-directed and goal-agnostic alternatives, we show that the same cost measure can support different speaker and listener-oriented interpretations. And we introduce a methodology to generate both types of alternative sets. Our results suggest that surprisal minimization over goal-directed alternatives provides the best explanation of production choices at the main verb choice point. This pattern is consistent across both the rank-based and probabilistic analyses, and it points to a speaker-driven tendency to prefer lower surprisal continuations among alternatives that express the same communicative goal. Meanwhile, our results for listener-oriented cost minimization paint a more complex picture. Although uniformity is minimized more often than chance in the rank-based analysis, utterance choice in the goal-agnostic setting is best predicted by a combination of shorter length and lower uniformity. Thank you for your attention. We release the code and data from our analyses for future use. Please get in touch if you have any questions.